Welcome everybody to another session of ImpactChat, a series of interesting conversations with real people that we hold on Wednesday evenings. My name is Kathy Kaplan and I've got the privilege of being the founder and the president of Impact. We're a 100% volunteer-driven and led community charity, and we make a difference to Victorian women and children fleeing extreme violence at home. While we are a charity, we actually don't give charity. What we do is that we give gifts and services with dignity, and we give dignity with gifts and services. If you're able to, please consider giving a tax-deductible donation, which we'll be directing to our court childcare program, a free service for families who need this while the parent is in court. I'm currently sitting at home on the land of the Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. I want to recognise that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are the first peoples of Australia, the traditional owners of the lands and the waters on which we're privileged to live, work and play. Lands and waters which have never been ceded. I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community, and I pay my respects to their peoples and to their elders past, present and emerging. This evening, we have two wonderful people here for you to meet, both former politicians amongst other things. Our host this evening is an Impact Board member, Philip Dalidakis, who was an MP in the Victorian Labor government, and Ted Ballieu AO, who was our former Victorian Premier of the Liberal government. I suspect that what we're going to learn is that there's at least two former politicians who have active family and communal lives outside of politics, and both have a wicked senses of humour. I encourage you to post your questions in the chat box so that Philip can include them in his conversation with Ted. And so over to you, Philip.
Thanks, Kathy, and welcome to everybody. We're going to have a really fun night tonight, and I just want everyone to relax. This is not going to be Politics 101. We are going to try and keep it as light as possible, but also have a bit of this is your life feel about it. Now, before I get stuck in with our guest, the former Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Ted Ballieu AO, and I'll ask him whether that actually stands for adults only in a moment. But nevertheless, I want to encourage you all to donate towards our vital programs. Of course, our court childcare program, which is a vital program we do at the Moorabbin Magistrates Court. For those of you that are unaware of the program, what it seeks to do is provide childcare facilities on 1 day a week to enable mothers who have to be at court to face their perpetrators, that they don't need to have their children in the courtroom with them, that they can keep them safe and in a safe space. That's one of our programs, of course, but not the only program. Many of you will also know about our Bags of Love as well. So feel free to give generously at our website. There is a donate button there at www.impactforwomen.org.au. Now that's enough. I will come back to you later on to remind you to give and give generously. But without further ado, let me introduce the man that is simply known as number 46. Ted Ballieu, welcome tonight. Welcome to the chat. And firstly, let's just ask, how did you spend your first day of freedom today?
Well, I just have to say, number 46, that's Mark Blitzavs, plays for Geelong, former international athlete, superstar, my favourite player, arguably. But I spent today, Philip, doing what I've been doing since Saturday night. I have been hiding, sobbing, and enduring the pain of all Geelong supporters.
Well, I wasn't going to mention football because, of course, I know that you're a passionate Cats fan. In fact, you managed to be sandwiched between a number of other Geelong premiers. Of course, before you, Steve Bracks was a Geelong premier. After you, of course, Dennis Napthine was a Geelong supporter. And of course, for those of you that don't quite understand, number 46 is a reference to the number that Ted Ballieu represents as the 46th Premier of Victoria. Now, if you do talk about Geelong any further, Premier, I do have the ability to mute you. So let's move on from football. And being a sad and sorry St Kilda supporter, being a sad and sorry St Kilda supporter, let's not talk about football at all. Now, Ted, you say that you've been hiding away since that fateful night. But in all honesty, how did you enjoy? It was a beautiful day today. And of course, it was really our first day where restrictions have eased. And I'm really keen to find out how you spent it.
Well, I did what I do most days. I got up and had a swim. I did a webinar this morning very early with Anthony Fauci, the US, their equivalent of the Chief Health Officer. He was doing a presentation for Melbourne University, and I sat on that for an hour, which was very interesting. And amongst the things he said, which you might be interested in hearing, is he said he was very confident there would be a vaccine in the US in the next 3 months. Now,
well, that's great news. So
that's, and then I went for a big long swim, and then I've been sitting on the computer ever since. And if you're looking out you can't quite see it out my back window, or out the window behind me, we've been replacing our front fence in the last couple of days. So I did a bit of that with the guys out there as well. But
and is that to keep? Is that fence replacement to keep the rabbits out? Ted, have I got you, or am I causing problems?
A house that's 120 years old in Hort. Am I unstable or are you unstable?
Well, I think I've always been unstable, so let's go with me.
Well, just throw your hands in the air if it's something that on my line, because I'll talk slowly.
So
the house we live in Hawthorn is 120 odd years old, and the fence has been here a long time, and it fell over.
Well, obviously, Ted, anything that's 20 years old would need some maintenance. So, so at least you're creating some employment for other people. So that's a great thing. Tell me, I want to take you back, Ted, to your childhood. You are one of 7 children. First question that I've got for you: how did you go at dinner time?
Well, I was the youngest of 7, 5 boys, 2 girls. And my eldest brother is 15, 16 years older than me. There are 5 of us still alive, but by the time I was at an age that I knew what was going on, my elder siblings had moved out of house. So we got progressively bigger as children. And, you know, I was the youngest and the biggest. So it was like all big families, it was a bit of fight for survival at dinner time. But it was a house full of what you might describe as engaged, contemporary kind of political speak and involvement. And I think I would probably be described as a good observer of the things that were going around me. So we had artists through the house, we had industry people through the house, we had politicians through the house of all sorts of sides, and we had academics and intellectuals, and we had roustabouts and farmers. So it was a bit of everything. But for me, it was all about the ocean. It was all about going fishing, and in winter times it was all about going to Geelong and sitting on the fence watching the Cats play, and the under-19s, the reserves and the seniors, as we used to do in those days. Spend the whole day down there. And I never quite appreciated what my dad was doing at the time, but I think he might have lost his license a few times had it been this day and age.
Well, this day and age is a very different time. There's no doubt about that. You have mentioned a couple of times about your love of swimming. Indeed, it's something that you do as a daily routine. That's down, is it down in the sea at the Brighton Bars, is it?
Well, Brighton is, would you believe, Brighton bars from here, and I am a Brighton iceberger, and I have been for the, I don't know, the better part of 20 years or something. It's just over the 20-kilometre limit, so I haven't been able to go there for months and months. And I'm going down there tomorrow morning. So I've been swimming at home and in Hawthorn, and sometimes at Balwyn as well. But it's been a bit limited the last few months. And so hopefully the ocean is still there. I haven't been in the ocean for, I don't know, since I think I had a swim in the middle of winter at Brighton briefly before we got locked down again. But I've been swimming for since 1981, so coming up 35, 40 years. And I started doing that because I fractured my neck playing rugby. Sounds dramatic, but it was only a hairline fracture, and I had some hairline fractures in my lower back as well, and swimming was recommended. And swimming has held me together for 30 years, but a few years ago I ended up having the big surgery on the spine. So I've got the titanium screws and the titanium bars, and I'm held together with modern medicine these days. And I can't carry much by way of load. So swimming's about the only thing I can usefully do exercise-wise, which is good.
Well, it's fantastic to hear that you have such a love for it and continue to enjoy it to this day. And of course, with the current Premier relaxing restriction. Go on, Ted.
I was just going to say that I became a Brighton iceberger because I'd met some of them, and a colleague and I started a swim 32 years ago, which is a 4-kilometre swim, which is one of the elite swims now. And I met some Brighton icebergers, and they were going to swim across the heads from Point Lonsdale
Queenscliff to Sorrento. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. It's about four kilometres plus, and you get swept out and swept back in again. And for me, that was a symbolic thing to do, because it's what my grandfather had done when he arrived here in 1853 as an unauthorised arrival. He jumped ship because he'd been a naughty boy out of the quarantine station on the Point Nepean side. He was captured, put back in the brig, he escaped again. So rather than swim ashore, he swam across the heads in 1853. No goggles, no speedos, nothing, no one to meet him on the other side. Didn't even have a towel. And he arrived in Queenscliff, settled on the beach, married a very young nurse who was on the ship behind him, and the two of them raised 14 children on the beach at Queenscliff. So given the opportunity to do that swim in reverse, I did it with the Brighton icebergers, and that's how I became a burger. And I've done it the other way as well. So it's a very scary thing to do. I wouldn't recommend you try that at home, so to speak.
So obviously you've talked about your great loves being obviously swimming and the Geelong Football Club. I'll leave family aside for one moment. We'll come back to the family because I think it's a really important part of your story, and certainly a little bit of that story that you've just shared now is really quite interesting. But what other loves do you have? Time away when you just need your own time? What do you do that you obviously take some great comfort and enjoyment out of?
I write. I sing, but that's very private. not always private. I have sung in the Parliament. I've sung in the Hanoi Opera House. I've sung at the Opera House at Versailles, all where there was no audience, fortunately, but that's one of the joys of life. It's the reverse of swimming, where, but it's the same thing. You're using your lungs to expel and make noise, and swimming, it's the amount of oxygen you can get into your body at the same time. So there are similarities, and it's one of the joys. And I'm an architect by profession, so I've got lots of interests on the side, and I do pay a fair bit of attention to architecture, and I'm an honorary professor, enterprise professor at the School of Design at Melbourne University and the School of Architecture at Swinburne similarly. So I spend a lot of time around architects, listening to architects, talking about architecture and planning. And I have a number of other things that you would describe as passions. So I'm on the International Advisory Council for Tobacco-Free Portfolios and the remarkable Bronwyn King, and that's taken me to New York and to the United Nations with my wife, and to be party to that. I'm a patron of a number of organisations, most of which are based on things I love. The Auburn Uniting Church Tower in Hawthorne, which is the most beautiful piece of architecture, and I became the inaugural president of that, and I'm now the patron. Evan Walker, your predecessor in the Upper House, Philip, another architect, Labor man, but very good friend, and once upon a time I used to work for him. He was the inaugural patron. When he died, I became the patron. But even when I was Premier, I was going once a month to the meetings of the Auburn Uniting Church, Friends of the Auburn Uniting Church Tower, who were raising some money to try and preserve that tower. And it's got scaffolding around it now. It's been 15 to 20 years, that exercise. So I got lots of things that I love doing, but it's a bit of a boring old list, I guess.
Now, Ted, you talked a little bit about architecture and those loves and your time spent as an architect. As an architect, what was it about form and structure that drew you in?
Well, for me, it was more about having an eye for the future. Let me put it into a little bit of context. I say publicly, and we probably all say, I'm a very proud Victorian. And if I asked you the question, what's the essence of being a Victorian? Probably everybody would have their own view. They might not have actually contemplated it much. But I have a very solid view in my mind about what the essence of being a Victorian is. And I argue, and I talk about this in speeches and all sorts of things, and I've been doing it for a while. If you look at the first non-Indigenous settlements in Victoria in the 1830s, they weren't penal like Tasmania or Sydney. They were agricultural. And symbolically, that was a function of what's great about Victoria: very good land, good climate, and good opportunities for agriculture. And then if you look at the post-1850s settlements, when gold was discovered, and gold kind of changed the equation for Victoria, people came to Victoria from all over the world, and we probably think that they mostly came from the UK. But in fact, those who came here had a number of essential characteristics. They came from all over the world. They came from South America. They came, like my great-grandfather, from the UK. But they came with courage. They had to have an eye on the future. They had to have some sort of sense of raising a family, growing a business, and doing well. But they had another abiding quality as well, and that is that they were invariably young. And if they weren't young, they were young at heart. Now, if you think about those who were here, we probably reflect on, oh, there were all those paintings of portly gentlemen who were the mayor or the mayor's wife, and they were overdressed. But in fact, nearly all the great decisions made in those early post-gold rush years were made by very young people. And I describe that as the essence of Victoria, because it was, even in the 1850s, a multicultural society. In fact, most Victorians would have no idea that there were two Chinese merchants, Lo Kong Meng and Luia Moi, young men at the time who came here chasing gold, and they became part of the foundation trustees of the Commercial Bank of Australia, which became the Westpac Bank. And they were Chinese, and that happened in the 1850s. And we don't think about that as much. It was a multicultural society even then, not without problems. And in fact, those problems sort of developed into what became the Chinese question. But the foundations of multiculturalism were there. The foundations of youthful, young, energetic excellence were there. And the foundations were there for people who were prepared to invest in the future. And all of that, for me, describes architecture. It's about planning the future. It's about dreaming. It's about trying to be better. It's about excellence. And it's about reaching out and touching every community. And that's what I love about Victoria. It's multicultural, it's young, it's energetic, it's in pursuit of excellence, it's family-based, but it's also open to new ideas, and it's progressive. Now, that's my view of Victoria, and that's why I feel comfortable being an architect. And it's what got me involved in politics. So as I was involved in the firm that I was working with, including, we were working in conjunction with Jackson and Walker, Evan Walker's firm, on schools. And we did a number of schools which we were strategically planning and master planning out 15, 20, 30 years. And you can only do that if you have a vision for the future. And we bumped into some of your colleagues in the 1980s, Philip, out of Canberra, who were causing some grief to schools. And that got me involved in politics. And one thing led to another. But architecture is the essence of Victoria. And I'll give you one little example. My office now, as a former Premier, and Steve Brax is upstairs and John Brumby's down the aisle, is at the old Treasury building in Spring Street. And it was designed by an architect named John James Clark. And he arrived here in the 1850s with, I think, 3 or 4 siblings and his parents. He was 13 years old, and he went to work immediately for the government architect. And he designed the old Treasury building at the age of 19. And it is one of the most beautiful buildings of its type anywhere in the world. And it is, for me, a symbol of the power of youth, the power of excellence, and the power of all things which are the serious advantages that Victoria has. And it was obviously the old Treasury building based on gold. And if you haven't had a look at it, it's worth going and looking at the gold exhibits there. There's a gold museum there, and it's where the gold was stored, stacked high to the ceiling in the 1850s. So it fits for me, it fits for politics, it fits for architecture, and it fits for being stuck in this crazy state even when we're locked in our rooms. That's a long-winded way of saying what I believe about Victoria. So.
Well, the beauty is, Ted, that in this question time, there are no bells. So you have the ability to give an expansive answer. And I found that quite fascinating. To think that it was architecture that was the catalyst for you to enter public life is really quite interesting. And I think it goes to show the depth of your love for architecture itself. I want to jump forward. I will jump around as we continue to go through the chat, but I want to jump forward to not 1999, your pre-selection into Hawthorn. What were you thinking right at the time as you put your hand up?
I was thinking, well, and I had been president, I'd been vice president of the Liberal Party for 4 years, and I'd probably been a noisy vice president, and I'd changed things, and then I became president, and I was president through 5 years, and for an unprecedented 4 elections, 2 state and 2 federal, and the party won 3 of those elections. And then I had a couple of years break, and then Phil Goode retired in Hawthorn, and the opportunity arose, and I said to myself, well, somebody with my internal political experience and my background, if I'm not prepared to have a go, how can I expect anybody else to have a go? And at that time, given that I'd been a bit of an agent of change, we had brand new pre-selection methods, and I had probably attended more pre-selections than anybody in Liberal Party history as president and vice president. And I think I attended 250, 300 pre-selections. And then it came to the Hawthorn pre-selection, and I found myself uncontested. So again, one thing led to another, and it was fairly short notice when Phil Goode withdrew. And I put my hand up. Suddenly I was the candidate for Hawthorn, and next thing you know, I'm the member for Hawthorn.
Now, I said I'll jump around a bit.
Very difficult for a Geelong supporter to be the member for Hawthorn, by the way.
I could well imagine that. Let's move forward to your reflections right now. Do you reflect fondly of your time in Parliament? Do you look at it as missed opportunities because there was more that you wanted to do? Are you grateful for having had the opportunity? What is your reflection on your time in public life?
Well, it's a tough life, and it started for me on day one. But it's a tough life. But I got opportunities that most people never get. People may not remember, but I was also Arts Minister as well as Premier. I would have dearly loved to have continued, and this will sound silly, but I would be very happy to be Premier today and dealing with the issues that Daniel has to deal with, because it's very focusing of the mind and the passion. And there were certainly lots of things that I would have liked to continue. And I'm probably one of the very few political figures. Evan Walker was one, Justin Madden was another architect, and we're capable of reading drawings and understanding what's being shown to us in drawings, not just in briefs. And that can cause some people in the world of politics and the public service to feel a little bit of anxiousness, because it's pretty difficult to get something past an architect or an experienced planner in the world of the public service. But there are lots of projects I would have liked to continue to do, but in politics, it's a numbers game, and I got my chance, and I put it this way. I left because I felt I had to do whatever was necessary to try and protect the government. I'll just put it that way.
Okay, so I want to go back to 1999, but before I go back to 1999, I don't want to let this moment pass. For those of you listening in, Ted and I had a chat last night, and he very graciously agreed to take any and all questions. There were no topics off limit. So given what you've just said, I want to take you back to the night that you resigned as Premier of Victoria. Given that the passion is clearly still there, the love of public policy is still there, why did you resign?
Well, it's a good question, Philip, and it's an interesting question because on the night I resigned, we had a party room meeting in which I resigned the leadership, and Dennis Napthine took over. And then I went straight at the hall and did a media conference. And there had been some stories in the media that week. And surprise or not surprise, no member of the media asked me that night why I was resigning. They all assumed I knew. They all assumed they knew. Their assumptions weren't correct. But I'm going to save that for the book. As I said, I in very global terms, I took the view that I had a responsibility to do whatever I could, not only to do the right thing for Victoria, but to do the right thing by the government, and that my interests personally didn't count for much compared to those other two factors. So apart from saying that, I'll leave the details to the book. And I will then say to you, Philip, you've been in the same boat in your own way. You've had the privilege of being a minister, and you, like me, pulled the plug at a time of your choosing. Now, do you want to say why? or are you writing the novel as well?
Well, I'd love to say that I have your skill in writing, but in grade 2 at parent-teacher interviews, my grade 2 teacher said to mum and dad, generally speaking, Philip's generally speaking. So that has haunted me ever since. And maybe I can do an Audible book. That seems to be all the rage these days. But look, we might get you to interview me another day, but for the moment, we're focusing on you.
Well, I remember walking away from that media conference, walking down the aisle outside the Legislative Council upstairs, and I was with my media advisor, who's a great friend, and I turned and spoke to her, and I said, that's amazing. Not one of them asked me why. And we both had a bit of a laugh as we walked away, but tis what it is. I stayed in the Parliament and I left of my own choosing in 2014.
Well, it's fair to say that you were succeeded by a very good man in John Pizzuto, and John is also another member of Parliament, or former member of Parliament, that I also count amongst my friends across the divide. And he has shown tremendous character since, of course, he lost his seat in the 2018 election. And I have had a question. I wasn't going to deal with questions just yet, but I have had a question asking whether you would be prepared or considering standing again. The question was about you standing as an independent, but I wonder whether or not you look at your former party and think that there's an opportunity as an elder or wise statesman to enter or re-enter politics as a guiding figure for the current generation.
Well, I go back to what I was talking about before, and I wrote about this in the Herald Sun a few weeks ago when the Herald Sun invited me and other former premiers to write an op-ed piece on what Victoria should be doing to get us through this recovery. I wrote 2 pieces, and the paper kindly published some of the second piece. And I made the point about the essence of Victoria being youthful and youthful energy and the focus on the future. And in my view, we have to make way. I'm a baby boomer, and the baby boomers have to accept that the other side of this recovery, young people will be making the decisions in Victoria, what we describe as young people. And that's how it should be, because that's the Victorian way. And I'm confident I could have stayed in the job I had, and there would have been all sorts of other consequences, but I could have stayed in the job. I made the decisions I made in what I thought was the best interest of the government and Victoria. I don't think it helps for formers to be not letting go, shall I put it that way. And some formers are very vocal. Some aren't, but formers have a privileged position, in my view. If I need to speak to a minister or a leader, then the status of a former will get me in the door or get me that phone call. And I use it sparingly, and I use it privately. And I think that's the way formers are best deployed. And I think the future belongs to the 25-year-olds, the John James Clarks of the next generation. The ones, and someone I love very much was just reminded me, it's those who haven't had their children yet who have probably got the greatest interest. Now, I might not agree with some of them right now, but I think we have to not only acknowledge that as a fact, but encourage them to have a go. And I'm all for having term limits for members of parliament. And if they're not specifically term limits, they ought to be implied term limits. And if you've had a go and you've made no difference, then move on.
Yeah.
I've had my go. I could cause all sorts of grief, I guess, but what would that prove? I want the best for Victoria. That's the way I think about it.
So let me jump in, seeing that you want the best for Victoria. I want to take you back to the election night 1999. You were celebrated coming into the parliament. It was widely commented at the time in the political press that a young, strapping Ted Ballieu was the future of the party. He would serve a term or two as a minister under Geoffrey Kennett, and then potentially be the heir apparent. And you come into parliament and you find out that the party that you have supported your adult life, that you have been pre-selected and then subsequently elected to represent in parliament for the seat of Hawthorn, now finds itself in opposition. What was going through your mind in the days afterwards about the way forward for you personally, you professionally, and for the party?
Well, it was training. It was training to be a Geelong supporter. Like Sunday morning, I went and lay on the grass. It was November. I lay on the grass for a few hours. I looked at the sky and I lamented the day before. And then it just got up and got on with it. And again, reflecting on those who came before us, what do you think? And those who arrived here in the 1850s with nothing thought when they arrived. And if you're not inspired by what they thought and did, then you haven't read enough.
So let me jump in, because you were a member of parliament for 15 years and you served as Premier for 2.5 years. And it's rare to have some... Just short of 2.5 years. And it's rare to find somebody who has been able to have that honour, not necessarily have the experience of having served as a minister previously or within a cabinet. And you were there for 2.5 years. And I just want to take you through what I found as probably three of, I think, your proudest moments as Premier, and I want to put them to you. I'd love you to talk a little bit about them and then tell me whether that actually equates with your top three moments as Premier of Victoria as number 46. So for me, I would have thought that your establishing of the parliamentary inquiry into child sex abuse, which was the precursor to Prime Minister Gillard's Royal Commission, which also led to some significant changes in some religious orders and the way that victims were able to then have a voice, was one of the most wonderful gifts that you could have given as a Premier. I also believe that your policy position in relation to Brodie's Law, which you might like to explain to some people in a moment what that is, and of course, your interests beyond that are obviously into supporting the public service and making sure that policy, and I think that this sometimes gets overlooked, that policy gets debated and tested before it gets implemented. And I'm keen to find out what your three favourite memories are, and also maybe talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, the only thing I'll add to it, because it actually links to some of those issues, is your time since advocating for victims of child sex abuse, most notably, of course, Malka Leifer, and also the issues surrounding both the yeshiva school and with Manny Wax in particular.
Well, let me just talk generally at first. You mentioned some social issues, and I think we achieved, even in a short time, we achieved quite a lot. We had a very leading hand in the NDIS, and
which you got for Geelong.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm sure Julia Gillard would argue the point, but I wrote to her and said a condition of our involvement would be that the NDIA be in Geelong, and I think we threw $20 million at that exercise to make that happen, and that's what happened. So the NDIS, I think, is an important reform. Likewise, there were social reforms that emerged out of the child abuse inquiry. And when we set up the child abuse inquiry, which was a promise we made in opposition, and I had met victims, and Mary Wooldridge, who was the most marvellous minister in this portfolio, we had a very good relationship, and we got Philip Cummins to run an inquiry as soon as we got there, and that led to setting up the parliamentary inquiry. And we were roundly criticised for doing that because it was going to be a disaster. It turned out to be anything but, and it was a very bipartisan effort, and that was important. And I am a very, very strong supporter of increased effort with bipartisanship, because I think we can achieve much more. And it did lead to the Royal Commission, and through the COAG process, we were able to have some impact on at least the terms of reference for the Royal Commission. And a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things haven't changed. And I was just watching again the Geraldine Doog documentary, Breaking the Silence, which aired 2 or 3 years ago, and was an expose of the yeshiva exercise. Along the way, that also took me into areas associated with domestic violence and issues of coercive dowry. And I remember as Premier meeting with Dr. Manjula O'Connor, who was working with young Indian women and young African women who were the victims of coercive dowry, and that was running the full gamut through to murder. And she's a heroine in her own right, and I was delighted to be able to help her. And I said to her and the people that she was helping, and I said it to the victims of Malka Leifer, the alleged victims of Malka Leifer, that I'll stand with you because that's what leaders have to do. I'll stand beside you in forums to give you credibility, to give you authenticity, and to make sure that your own people aren't cutting you down. And that's what I've been able to offer, and I'll continue to do that. But in the same vein, there were lots of other things that I don't feel proud about anything. I was just pleased to be able to do things. I went through a process on infrastructure where I was actually deeply engaged in assessing projects. And it will come as a shock to some people to learn that some projects are there. Someone makes a decision. It may be a quite random decision, and then the bureaucracy has to sort it out afterwards. I took the view that we should be sorting it out before we make announcements. And I remember subcommittees of cabinet that I was chairing on some of our big projects, and I insisted on having full expose on functionality, and we'd sit the public servants down in front of all the drawings and they say, okay, I want you to describe how this works. And in that process, we uncovered some pretty extraordinary things which in the ordinary course of events would slip through and cause major problems later on. Anyway, the East-West project was one of those. We pursued it. It was detailed. It was Labor Party policy when we went into government, so we figured that we had an imprimatur there. Anyway, the history is the history is. But I think you can do a lot more before you announce projects to get them right. And I was trying to persuade the bureaucrats to do that, and trying to persuade colleagues that that's the right way to go. Not always politically smart, but you discover things. And for instance, I'll give you a little story. We were told when we got there that the Metro project, which is now a big project, was shovel ready. And we got there and we discovered that the so-called $10 million order hadn't been spent and the work hadn't been done. And we had to do that work, which we went ahead and did. And we planned what was possible with the Metro tunnel. And we got to the stage where the engineers were saying, well, Premier, this is going to be very, very difficult, just in sheer functionality, because the tunnels had to be so deep that it was going to be very difficult to manage exit and egress from those safely, because it'd be a 5 or 6 minute trip even on escalators to get down to the tunnels. And there were logistical exercises like that. There were cost exercises, and it was around about the time I left. We had made a decision as to how we were going to proceed. Anyway, after I left, some of that changed, and I can't account for that. When Daniel got there, good luck to him, he announced that they were going back to the original shovel-ready, and he announced it was going to be a shallow double tunnel, or a single tunnel shallow, and it was going to go under the Yarra and over the CityLink underpass, over the CityLink tunnel. And if you know anything about the tunnel, that'd be a very difficult thing to do, to dive down and then come back up again. Anyway, it wasn't going to ever be possible. But Daniel and his minister announced they were going to save money by doing that. Well, over the course of 18 months, they discovered that that wasn't possible either. And it returned to being a double tunnel deep and an expensive one. And what they had the advantage of, and I think it's turned out to be a good project, is the engineers came up with a different way of building it. They had to buy some buildings adjacent and go down demolish those buildings, go down under there and come in sideways, which made it doable. But all of that was 5 years of preparation before anything really happened. And it was never going to be that shallow tunnel that was politically announced.
Now,
so
Ted,
there are always challenges, but
I was just going to say,
there are lots of things that we achieved.
Let me jump in because I'm conscious that we've got about 10 minutes to go, and I've still got quite a few topics that I want to be able to get through with you. outside of the issues that I was my view about some of your massive success stories, was there anything else that you look back on fondly that I didn't mention or that you haven't touched upon?
Well, the first thing is we made a number of promises, and we met most of those promises. We had to fix a whole lot of problems. I won't go into them, but they were shocking problems. They're mostly around IT, the Mikey project, all sorts of things like that. We made commitments to that. We got the budget back in shape, and without being critical, the budget was in terrible shape when we got there. We had to do that and had to cop a lot of flack for that. One of the things that I think is really important is we made life easier for business, and we made efforts to expand the economy. And in international engagement, we lifted the bar like it had never been lifted before with the trade missions we took to China and India and elsewhere. And they were so successful that Tony Abbott's government followed exactly what we did in China, and David Cameron's government in the UK followed what we did in India. And I think, as you know well, Philip, successive governments have gone on with that in one way or another. The internationalisation of our economy is important, and it's one of the challenges we now face. But there are plenty of other things we did in the arts field. We introduced White Night, which was such a success. We got a home for Circus Oz. We introduced the Small Town Transformation Project, was just a piece of joy to be involved in that. Plenty of other things in the arts field. IBAC, we wouldn't have had IBAC, which has been a very successful reform. We promised the PSOs on railway stations, and people said it had never happened, it couldn't happen, and it wouldn't work. Well, it's been a great thing in its own right. So, and we did the hospitals, we did the extra schools, we did the port development, we did the level crossing upgrades, more than had been done before. And good on Daniel, he's done some more, but I would argue that way it's been funded, but that's another thing. And we took on some national reforms as well, but tax reform, you don't get a lot of people shouting, hey, what a wonderful tax reform. But people have been talking about reforming the fire services levy for 20 years, and we actually did it. And it was the biggest tax reform in Victorian history.
Well, that's a long list.
I'm not a shouter, Philip. The things that I get private comfort out of are sort of the things that you mentioned, and even the assistance we were able to give a girl who was dying, Narelle Gresh, in identifying her father. And as I used to often say to our team, and I said in my departing speech, the little things count.
Now, Ted, for those, there will be people listening that are surprised that I haven't challenged some of the things that you've said. It's not my desire to challenge or to change your version or your perception and account of your time in office. And so I'm loving this chat. And
so I'm trying not to be political, and I'll give you some examples. I thought John Brumby did a fantastic job in China, and we sought to advance that. And I said so publicly in opposition. Let me take it a step further, Ted, because I want to reveal for everybody on this call a depth of understanding of how we work together across the aisle. Whilst I was Trade Minister here in Victoria, there was a delegation in India that Victoria needed representation for, and Ted was going, and I asked Ted if he would represent Victoria there, and he not only agreed, but helped to prosecute a range of trade outcomes for Victorian companies. And I offered to reimburse Ted, given that I felt it was appropriate and just. And for those people on the call, I want you to know that Ted's response was, no, I want to go on this anyway. I do not need to be reimbursed for representing the state that I love. So, and Ted and I had a lot of
work, and we did a lot of work together in Vietnam as well. And so I just want people to understand that Ted has indeed been a contributor post-political life and done it in a very selfless way. And so, Ted, obviously you've talked about your love of trade, and I just wanted to share that story with people so that they can understand a little bit about you as a person and as a man. Now,
I was just going to say, I've worked a lot in India in government and since, and I'm now on the Australia-India Council as well, and a patron of the Australia-India Chamber of Commerce, but also in Vietnam. We did things in northern Vietnam, which no one had done before, and in fact, probably not many of those on this call would know that Hanoi got itself a Grand Prix under Formula One terms.
Yes.
And that was a proposition I put to them about 5 years ago, and they got their Grand Prix, and sadly it had to be cancelled because of COVID. But I remember a Vietnamese delegation coming to Melbourne, and they're at Parliament House, and I rang Philip and said, mate, I can't get anybody here to talk to them. And Philip came straight over and was the minister and did the right thing. And we've worked closely together. And I've done the cladding inquiry, chaired the cladding inquiry post the Grenfell fire for the Victorian government, and worked closely with the current government on that. So I try and avoid being political if I can.
Now, we've got a few minutes to go. So in 60 seconds or less, did you want to have a chat about Brodie's Law?
Brodie's Law, a young girl who was working at a cafe in my electorate, and she was bullied and tragically died, and the law was changed to address bullying in the workplace, and I think all sides of Parliament came together on that. So I don't claim to own that legislation, but pleased to be able to assist in making those sort of things happen, because a lot of politics is bipartisan in a way, and if you make a conscious effort at it, we can do a lot more. And where we're divided, we probably need a few more back channels to try and do a bit of healing.
Now, I've got 60 seconds with. This is something that I've often done in my workplaces with my own staff to try and find out a little bit more about the person, and it will be a bit lighter than some of the subject matter we've gone through. But I've got 2 questions that have been asked of you. But before I do, I just want to remind people, because I think this is an amazing stat for those that love politics. But when Ted Ballieu won the election in 2010, he picked up the coalition picked up a swing of 5.96%. That swing was greater than the swing that Jeff Kennett got in the 1992 election, which was 5.78%. So I think that's something that you can always laud over your friend and former Premier, Geoffrey Kennett. But I don't ask you to talk about that. I just want to leave that there for everybody to be aware of. The 2 questions I've had to put to you, one was the impact on your family, because you've managed to try and protect your family. So I'll ask you to quickly talk about that. And then the other question is, and this is a little bit more topical, and if you choose not to answer it, I perfectly understand given the bipartisanship that you've spoken of. But if you were Premier, what would you have done differently during this COVID time? And have you agreed with everything that Premier Andrews has undertaken?
Well, I agree with, I'll start with the second question first. I haven't agreed with everything, but I respect the effort that's gone into it. Would I have done some things differently? Maybe. I don't think, I mean, I've actually said this to some journalists. I don't think it's useful for me to be publicly commenting on that. This is, it's a tragic situation, and I don't think anybody has yet got to grips with the depth of the economic earthquake that has taken place in Victoria. And again, I go back to the origins of Victoria and you put yourselves in the shoes of people who are facing incredible challenges, and how would you behave in the face of incredible challenges? And that's where we should draw our inspiration from. On the question of family, politics is tough on family, and it has consequences for kids. And some of my predecessors, I know the impact on our kids and wider family, and I'm sure my successors have had the same issues, but I think that's common ground when we just don't talk about that. But I'll give you one little funny example, and it's not to be critical at all of all of this, because no matter how hard it is, and it gets very hard at times, and I've been in some pretty hard personal circumstances, if you just let it go through the keeper and not respond, it's probably the best thing. My very first day in Parliament, and I happened to go into opposition, and in Parliament has to be somebody from both sides of the House sitting at the tables in the middle for the Parliament to proceed. So if you're a front bencher, you take your turn sitting at the table. So my first turn came to be sitting at the table, and I had not at that stage given my inaugural speech, so I wasn't allowed to say anything. So I'm sitting there, and a member of the government, and I'll spare that member of the government a name, was standing, speaking, and was taking the opportunity to give me a welcome in the finest traditions of the Labor Party. And I'm sure it wasn't intended, so I don't take it as ever intended, but in the course of a very, very shouty presentation, a large gollop of spit found its way across the table and landed on the shirt in the middle of my chest. And that was day one. And I thought, okay, I take that as my badge of honor. I'm not going to respond. I smiled inside, and that's the way I conducted myself thereafter, no matter the circumstance. So,
well, you'd be a big fan. You'd be a big fan of the barriers that are up in place in the chamber, the COVID barriers at the moment. Then
I did. I laughed when I saw that. I'm sure it wasn't intended, but it was one of those funny moments that you can't forget. But it was a useful symbol for me that, oh, okay, this is day one. How do we go from here?
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have gone 3 minutes over time. I will be quick with my 60 seconds with Ted. I could speak to you, I reckon, easily for another 1 or 2 hours. You'd probably hang up on me by then, but you've been extraordinarily gracious, and it's been a really enjoyable chat for me. I hope it has been for you and everybody listening. But I'm going to start you with 60 seconds with, and your time starts now. Your nickname.
Well, I thought you said it was 46. I like that. Mark Blitzaz, but I don't really have a nickname. Ted is the sort of name that people use as a nickname. So some people call me Big Ted or Eddie. So that's about as far as I've got with nicknames.
Favorite karaoke song?
Oh, well, it would probably be Paul Kelly, Winter Coat, or from St Kilda to King's Cross, it's 13 hours on the bus. Something like that.
And here I was thinking that you were going to choose back in the USSR. Favorite beverage, alcoholic or non-alcoholic?
Well, I'm other than the very, very, very occasional beer, I don't drink, so that's pretty straightforward. But oh, listen, I used to drink a lot of cranberry juice, but I don't do it anymore because it's not good for you. So when I was playing rugby and I didn't drink, I drank Coca-Cola in extravagant proportions, and I've got 13 crowns as a consequence. So I can't vouch for favourite drinks. As soon as you make a favourite drink, you're actually going to damage yourself. Keep it varied.
You're blowing my 60 seconds to 60 seconds with each question. Okay, favourite food?
Curry.
Favourite restaurant?
Bamboo House.
Coriander, yes or no?
Yes, but not
Rocket,
on its own.
yes.
Send you insane.
Rocket, yes or no?
I had this argument yesterday. I got sent to buy rocket. I came back with a handful. What do you mean a handful? I said, well, it's crap, isn't it?
Rocket is a weed. It does not deserve to be on a plate. You and I are on a joint ticket. If you could invite 3 people to dinner, who would they be?
Tim Minchin, Paul Kelly, Mark Blitzavs.
Federation Square, great architectural addition or a missed opportunity?
It works.
Okay, I think that's sitting on the fence. Don't worry about it. We'll keep going. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
An architect.
And finally, your favourite innovation tech minister, could be current or retired.
Favourite innovation
minister. We can also say favourite trade minister or favourite small business minister. Choose your pick. Could be former, current or retired.
Interestingly, the name Dalidakis is an old Greek word. It means don't mess with me.
Ted Ballieu, you have been an absolute joy to chat with. You have been a great credit to yourself and your family, both during public life and since. I've been privileged to know you. Number 46, I salute you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Philip. Can I just say to Kathy and all of your leadership team on Impact, the job you do is fabulous. And what you're doing, you probably get frustrated from time to time. But every little thing you do, and I mentioned the little things before, is having an impact on someone's life. And there are other people for whom that impact is a huge thing. And as Paul Kelly would say, from little things, big things grow.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not.
Well
I wasn't cutting you off, Ted. That was our president and founder, Kathy Kaplan. But we will get you back for Christmas carols at a later event. Kathy, let me hand back to you. And once again, 46, I salute you. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you so much, Ted. Being a bad Melbourne girl, I didn't realise the significance of 46. I thought 42 was the answer to everything, but now I've learnt tonight that actually 46 is the answer to pretty much a lot of things. The Titanium Man. What struck me, Ted, was until Philip pushed you to list some of your successes, how modest you are, and what a breath of fresh air that is for us nowadays. So much to hear. I loved how you've got an eye for the future still, and you're passionate about that. But you've obviously got a keen respect for the past, and I really, really gained so much from listening to you, and I'm sure everybody else did. It's really nice to have 2 politicians who weren't being politicians, just being decent, good men here chatting with us. So thank you to both of you. Now, we're coming back next week, not in a fortnight, but next week. So the day after Cup Day, it's Cup season. Now, some of the people on the screen here are into horse racing and fashion and all of that, and some of the people here are not. So what I'd like to suggest that if you do dabble, can you give an equivalent dabble as a donation? And if you don't dabble, but you might have been in a sweeper had you been at work, donate that dabble too. So next week, we've got another good friend of Impact, Eve John, and she's going to be in conversation with Serena Lindemann, who is apparently the milliner to the stars. So what's in store for us next week are 2 lively women telling us lots of fascinating stories, not about racing and hats, so to speak, but about the personalities and the people behind them. So we certainly hope that you will join us for that. Now, we've been gifted this beautiful quilt that you can see behind me in honour of RBG, and we're auctioning that online, and we would love to see it in someone's home, or better still, in Parliament, hint, 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 guys, or in a law court, or in a lawyer's office, or school, or anywhere. So it's all in the e-newsletter most of you would have received. If you haven't received that, please email us and we'd be happy to send that out to you. or you could quickly scan the little QR code there, and that would take you to that website where you can make a bid if you'd like to. Please tell all the people you think might be interested in that, or better still, all the people who should be interested in that, and let them know about it. The only other thing I want to tell you about is that some of our friends have been having great fun over this COVID lockdown period, and every rubbish bin day they've been going out in costume with a different theme each week. And they've decided to put together a 13-month calendar with all the proceeds coming to Impact. So we would encourage you to look at that. It would be a marvellous Christmas present, Hanukkah present, Kwanzaa present, Happy New Year present, Just Because I Love You present for just, I think, in the early $20. And those proceeds will come to us too, and all of that will go to the child court thing. So hope to see you next week. Till then, please stay safe, stay home. And just because we've loosened the regulations doesn't mean that you have to go out everywhere and line up in front of Kmart for the shop to open. So stay safe, stay home if you can, stay well, and we'll see you next week. Good night.